Welcome back, everyone out there in YouTube land. This is your tinfoil hat economist coming to you at the speed of light with episode number 5 and the promised mystery topic, which is coronavirus, helicopter drops, and Stanley Fischer. So, most of you know what is coronavirus, so let's hop over that one and move to helicopter drops. In the context of this and succeeding videos, it will refer to the practice of a central bank printing, digitizing in the modern world, printing money to finance government outlays. My preference is to finance government tax cuts. And that leaves us with Stanley Fischer. Now, Stanley Fischer was the governor of the Bank of Israel from 2005 to 2013, and then vice chairman of the U.S. Federal Reserve Board, that's the U.S. Central Bank, from 2014 through 2017, and then he joined BlackRock, which is the world's largest money manager, something like $7 trillion in assets under management. Now, what's interesting is that he's the central banker's central banker. He's been a central banker on 2 different continents, and one of his students was Mario Draghi, the top guy at the European Central Bank. So this is a man with connections to central banking on 3 different continents, most of the developed world. And in August of 2019, last year, Stanley Fischer came out in favor of helicopter drops, which is something of a heresy in most monetary policy circles. He made a rather bold statement here. He said, and this is back in August of 2019, before the coronavirus came along. He said, bold statement here, there is not enough monetary policy space to deal with the next downturn. Basically, interest rates are already low. You can lower them. You can go to negative rates. Although you begin to wonder if banks can be strong-armed into lending as the economy retreats or is in recession. Property values start going down. Banks tend to stop lending. And in the U.S. anyway, commercial bank lending is about half on property. So when property lending and values contract, very hard to stimulate the economy through the mechanism of commercial bank lending. So he says, there is not enough monetary space, policy space, to deal with the next recession. Flat statement. Fiscal policy, says Stanley Fischer, should play a greater role, but it is unlikely to be effective on its own. And we all know that fiscal policy is clunky, tends to happen after a recession. You get the automatic stabilizers, things like unemployment insurance start kicking in, some extra government spending, social welfare programs. But the time to avoid an auto accident is before you have it, and the time to avoid a recession is before you have it, and fiscal policy doesn't really do that. He says an unprecedented response is needed when monetary policy is exhausted and fiscal policy alone is not enough. Okay? An extreme form of going direct would be an explicit and permanent monetary financing of a fiscal expansion, or so-called helicopter money. So that's one way. And he then comes up with what he calls a practical way of going direct, would be to deliver the following: defining the unusual circumstances that would call for such unusual coordination. Well, I would think the coronavirus and the almost probable recession we'll see in 2020 is an unusual circumstance. And we also have, as Stanley Fischer himself says, we're out of monetary policy space. So what are we going to do? We're going to do helicopter drops. 2, he says, in such circumstances, an explicit inflation objective that fiscal and monetary authorities are jointly held accountable for achieving. So you need to have, he says, an inflation target. I'll I'll come back. I have an issue with that. And then he says a mechanism that enables nimble deployment of productive fiscal policy and a clear exit strategy. My complaint with a lot of this is that Stanley Fischer, as smart and as experienced as I'm sure he is, has that central banker monomania that inflation is the most important variable of any out there in the world of macroeconomics. And he is implying that the unusual helicopter drops that he calls for would end if an inflation target was hit. And I kind of wonder, if you have 8% unemployment, but you've hit your inflation target, well, I really don't care. I think you've got to get that employment rate down one way or another, unless you want Bernie Sanders in the White House forever, or AOC next. So I would think preventing the unemployment rate of ever going again above 4% is a much more reasonable goal than holding inflation to 2%, particularly since we seem to live in a world where the constant pressure is to undercut inflation and interest rates. They've been falling for 40 years, since about 1980, globally. So what's going to make interest rates go up again and inflation? He said the size of this new facility that he imagines would be determined by the central bank and calibrated to achieve the inflation objective, which could include making up for past inflation misses. Really, there's just a monomania about inflation in central banker circles, kind of a peevish fixation almost. And I hope that central bankers can move to a more holistic perspective. And in fact, the directions of the U.S. Congress that the Federal Reserve target inflation and unemployment rates is actually more sound than the predilection of central bankers to fight inflation at every possible opportunity. So, but the takeaway from all of this is that a major figure within the world of central banking has come out forthrightly in favor of helicopter drops. Now, the sad part of this is that we may be facing an economic recession in the United States in the first quarter and first half, and we don't have the tools in place to counteract that recession. As Stanley Fischer says, he says we're out of space in terms of monetary policy, and fiscal policy is clunky, slow. So we need to see people in the policy world begin to address what Stanley Fischer has addressed, which is how to create a method for helicopter drops to be implemented. We will explore this in further videos, and I look forward to seeing you all there. So this is your tinfoil hat economist signing off at the speed of light, and we will look forward to episode 6 with another mystery topic.